Alright, welcome everyone to our lesson on triangles. So just a little cartoon to start things off. We got an equilateral, isosceles, scalene, and then the kid says, "You forgot Bermuda." You didn't know the Bermuda Triangle is a famous place in the Atlantic Ocean where it seemed like a lot of planes and boats disappeared. So look that up when you get a chance. Moving on to our official lesson. In terms of triangles, we can classify them or name them by their angles and by their sides. So first looking at their angles, some important notes. All triangles have two acute angles. So no matter what triangle you come across, it will always have at least two acute angles. In order to classify by angles, we look at the third angle. And we've talked about this about angles. When you have congruent or equal angles, then we use arcs to show that they are congruent. So if two angles have one arc, those two angles are congruent. If two angles have two arcs, those are congruent. So here are the classifications by angle. So we have obtuse triangles. So notice that this triangle has two acute angles. So when you're looking at these, what I would recommend doing is kind of cross off. These are the two acute angles. And let's look at the third, and that is greater than 90, so it is obtuse. Okay, right triangle, well that's pretty easy. It just has the right triangle box here, but again, if we cross off two of the acute angles, we see that that's the right angle. So a right triangle. For an acute triangle, again, cross off two of the acutes, and sure enough, we have a third acute angle that is less than 90 degrees. And then finally, notice these three angles all have a single arc. That means that they are equiangular, they are all congruent. Now this is a special kind of acute triangle because notice if we cross off two of the acute, we're left with a third acute angle, but this one's special because all three angles are equiangular. And what we'll find over time is when you have two angles or more that are congruent, their opposite sides are congruent. So here, for this angle, we can say that the opposite side of that angle and the opposite side of the bottom angle are congruent, and the opposite side of the top angle is congruent. So all of these are congruent, and we'll see if we classify this by side, it would be an equilateral. All right. So moving on to sides and talking about equilateral triangles as our first one, we can use the equal number of tick marks when congruent sides have the same length. So here is that equilateral that I was talking about. And it kind of goes in reverse in terms of if you have two sides that are congruent, you're going to have their opposite angles are congruent as well. Okay, so this would actually be an equiangular equilateral triangle. All three sides are congruent, all three angles are congruent. We have scalene triangles where no sides are congruent. Notice no tick marks. Isosceles triangles, we have exactly, or actually at least two. So technically an equilateral is also isosceles because it has at least two congruent sides. Here this isosceles has exactly two congruent sides. And again, as I mentioned, if these two sides are congruent, go to the opposite angle, and those angles are congruent as well. Alright, so a lot of what we're doing is going to be classifying each triangle. When we classify by angle and side. So again, the process for angles is find two acute angles, don't look at those, but look at the third angle, and we can see 115 is obtuse, so we have an obtuse. So that's by angle, and then by side we have no tick marks, and we don't have any congruent angles, so we know that this is scalene. None of these sides are the same, so obtuse scalene. Looking at B here, again we have, I'm going to cross off these two angles here. We can see that this third angle is acute, so this is acute. I do see two tick marks here. So that means we have two congruent sides, so that's an isosceles, acute isosceles. And do notice we have these two congruent sides. Their opposite angles are also congruent. Alright, so try these on your own real quick. Alright, so the first one is a right isosceles. Notice we have the right angle, and then this is our equiangular. All of the angles are congruent. And equilateral, all the sides are congruent. Alright, so the key thing is when you're asked to classify, do it by angle and by side. Again, find two acute angles. The third angle is going to be what determines what it is, what the triangle classifies as by angle. Alright, now last thing to cover for this lesson is how to draw triangles. So this one we want to draw a triangle with measures of 30, 60, and 90, and then classify the triangle. A lot of students forget to classify after they draw, so please remember to do that. So very similar process with measuring angles, so let's go ahead and start to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a nice long line here so that I can easily use my protractor. I'm going to go to the end of the line here, and I'm going to line up my vertex with the end of the line and my baseline, my 0 mark, with the line itself. And I'm going to make a little mark. I'm going to go with the 30 degrees first. So here's 30 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and make a nice long line for that. Alright, now the tricky thing with these triangles is you don't know how long to make it exactly. So it's kind of up to you. You probably will need to make an adjustment at some point as to where you need to draw your lines. I'm just going to go really crazy and draw it pretty far out here. Alright, and then what I like to do is I like to go to the other side of the line. So you could go somewhere up here and measure another angle, but I'm going to go to the other side of the original line I drew, and I'm going to draw one of the other angles. So we did the 60, we did the 30, we have 60 and 90 left. Really, it's up to you which one you want to do. I'm going to do this 60, which would be right here. So mark it, rotate, and draw the line. And you'll notice that I have some pieces overlapping here. I can just draw that to right here. Now it's up to you. If you want, you can leave this long piece or you can erase it. It's kind of up to you. Alright, so make sure you label your angles. So this is 30, this is 60, and then this should be 90. I'm going to go ahead and check real quick. So this one I'm going to go upside down, see how close I am. So again, line up the vertex, line up the baseline, the 0 line, and you can see I'm probably within a degree or so. It looks like mine is at 91. So that's good. So this is my 30, 60, 90 triangle. Alright, so Yeah, I had labeled the 90. So next up, we have a slightly different one. This one we're given lengths and an angle measure, and we want the angle measure to be between those two lengths. So this one, it specifically says 3-inch, 4-inch that meet at 20 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and specifically draw a 3-inch. And then I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to measure a 20-degree angle. So here's 20, make a mark, rotate, and then I want to draw exactly a 4-inch. So there is a 4-inch. And then what I'm going to do is label my angle. This is 20 degrees. And then I'm going to connect my last side here with another line. And that is done. Now, something that I told you that a lot of people forget, I actually forgot, that's that classify the triangle. So I kind of blew that one, so I apologize. So to classify this one, notice we have an acute here, an acute here. So our third angle here is obtuse. All right, so we have obtuse. And then if you want to, you could double check to measure this, but since none of these angles look congruent, none of the sides look congruent, I think it's pretty safe to say it is obtuse scalene. Again, you can measure it to double check. Going back to our previous one, obviously we have a right angle, so this is a right. And again, none of those sides are congruent, so that's also scalene. Alright, so that'll do it for this lesson.